Hi, everybody. This is Anthony Serenana with SportsSceneTV.net. We're in front of the CIF Southern Section offices as we were getting an opportunity to talk with the CIF about the policies and procedures as they will address them when investigating the incident that occurred at the Mayor's Cup game between the Diamond Ranch Panthers and the Diamond Bar Brahmas. We had an opportunity to sit down and talk with Assistant Commissioner Glenn Martinez, and here's what he had to say.
Well, first off, it was an unfortunate incident, and any time you have something like this that involves actions like this with any of our interscholastic schools, it's not a good thing. You know, we're always disappointed. We preach sportsmanship always, you know, as one of our top tiers. So we're disappointed in something like that. However, when things like this happen, we use a variety of different stakeholders to help us get involved. First and foremost, we rely on the schools to report, you know, any type of incidents like this. And so each school has a responsibility to help report incidents, ejections, any type of what we call misconducts. So the schools have a responsibility on their end. Second, whenever you get an incident like this involving something where there's a fight or a brawl, or when students leave their bench areas, then I rely on my area liaisons. We have 10 area liaisons that each oversee sections geographically. They help act as a kind of middle person between my office and their schools that they represent. So I've asked my area liaison to look at that film, in addition to the head of the football officials in that area, which is the Foothill Citrus. So I've been in contact with both of them. They both have asked the two schools involved to forward them unedited versions of the game. So they'll sit down, evaluate it, get back with me, and then that'll be the starting point of the investigation, and then we'll go forward from there.
Is there a department that handles every incident such as the one that occurred, or is each incident given an individual governing board or liaison person that?
Well, there are 4 assistant commissioners. Each of the assistant commissioners is responsible for their particular sports. So in my case, I'm the sports administrator for football, and so it would come to me. If it was wrestling, I'm the sport administrator for wrestling, it would come to me. If it was baseball, it would also come to me. But each of the assistant commissioners has their particular sports, and they have authority and jurisdiction over their sport. So each of us would deal with that depending on which sport. This is football, so lucky me.
Will the same board oversee the investigation, be responsible also not only for players and the sanctions, but also for coaches and the sanctions, and even maybe recommending schools and possible changes for them to look at?
Well, any of the student athletes or a coach that's in violation of the rules, okay, will fall under our umbrella, the CIF Southern Section, and specifically, my recommendations. In terms of personnel decisions, I didn't hire any of those coaches, so they don't work for me. And so their schools are member schools. Their principals are expected and have a responsibility to enforce the rules that they help put in place. So any decisions about coaches per se would be personnel decisions. In terms of players, if they violated specific rules, then the consequences will fall accordingly.
Since this was a Hacienda League game, does the Hacienda League have its own governing body or board that will also look into the incident? And who do they report to, or as far as how do they come up with their recommendations or actions for sanctions?
Well, all of our leagues have their own specific bylaws for their sports, and their bylaws can cover a variety of different things. In this particular case, it's not a Hacienda League incident as much as it's 2 schools who are part of the Hacienda League. Leagues, as I mentioned, can have their own bylaws. They can be more restrictive, okay, than our bylaws. They can't be less restrictive. So it's really not an investigation or an incident of the Hacienda League as much as is the 2 schools involved and what rules they violated, and then the actions will be imposed on the schools, players, coaches, whomever, not necessarily, or no, not in any case an infraction on the league itself.
Okay. And people are probably wondering and asking, how long does it take for CIF to come up with a ruling as far as sanctions or actions?
Well, the investigation began immediately. The schools were in contact with the area liaison initially to let that person know. As soon as I got information of it, I contacted the stakeholders, the 2 that I want involved in the investigation and the review of the film. I spoke with them a couple times this morning, and they're currently reviewing it, I assume, as we speak, and I expect to hear something back. Whether they've completed all of it or not, I don't know, but I expect to hear something this afternoon and tomorrow morning at the latest.
Not asking you to use this incident as an example of any rules that were infracted here, but is there anything in the rule book that actually addresses certain incidents that occur? I mean, if you wanted to look it up on a certain chapter or bylaw?
Absolutely. In fact, in every one of our sports, we have a rule that relates directly to this type of an incident, where not just player ejections for fights, for flagrant misconducts, but also for players leaving the team bench area, and that's a good portion of what we're talking about. I've read the initial officials report that indicates some players were ejected for fighting, but this is a case where now we're investigating if players left the team bench area, and that specific bylaw is actually listed in each one of our sports. In addition to that, it's a National Federation rule that says if a player leaves his bench confines to join in a fight or a brawl, then it leads to an immediate ejection and has a carryover effect of the next contest.
And does CIF bring in the schools or the coaches in like a meeting room, hand out the sanctions or actions, or is this how is this policy given to everyone?
Once I get a report back, once all the findings are clear and forwarded to me, then I'll communicate with the two schools. Depending on what the findings are, I can communicate usually through their athletic administrators, sometimes athletic directors, in this case probably through their principals. I will entertain a meeting if possible, but if we can resolve it by telephone, then that'd probably be the way that we best proceed. It doesn't preclude us from bringing in all the schools. I'm not quite sure what value there would be in bringing the coaches in. Those are, again, decisions that we leave to the schools to handle on their own. But in terms of what's going to happen, what the final outcome, I'll convey that to the the two schools and their administration.
And then finally, is there anything else that you'd like to add or mention to high school sport fans maybe that we didn't cover? Or
well, I mean, like I started with, this is an unfortunate event. You never like to see these kind of things. When you open up the paper on Saturday morning to read about games, you want to read about the excitement, the game-winning touchdown, the whatever case may be. The last thing you want to see is some kind of a brawl or an ejection or the failure to complete a game. High school athletics is very exciting, and in a pure form, it's really something that the fans need to get out and see. And so anything like this kind of taints it. It doesn't take away from all the others. It doesn't take away from everything else that was positive. Friday night and in all athletics, it's just one of those unfortunate things. It's not something that we don't treat serious. In fact, just the opposite. But it's something we want to correct and then be able to move on.
we want to thank the CIF Southern Section Office for granting us this interview to discuss their process of the investigation. We have reached out to both school districts at this time to find out their policies and procedures in the process of the investigation, but at this time they have declined to comment. So make sure you stay tuned with us here at sportscenetv.net as we will bring you the latest news and information going on with the investigation of the Mayor's Cup game. I'm Anthony Serenana in front of the CIF Southern Section Office for sportscenetv.net.